Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to you, all three of you, for the work that you do. Our government would be far less efficient without the fantastic work that you do. Ms. Buller, I would like to start with you, but actually ask all three of you because you had expressed concern, along with Mr. Horowitz, about desire for an independent testimonial subpoena authority. And I think this is important that we explore that a little more. Would you speak to that, and actually all three of you, of why this subpoena authority you feel is necessary?
Often during the time that we're conducting an audit or an investigation, people who have knowledge of events that happened during the course of the activities that resulted in the audit or investigation leave for whatever reason. Either they retire conveniently sometimes, or they just leave. And we cannot, once they leave the government, make them talk to us. When they're employees of the government, we do have the ability to access them. Once they're gone, we don't. And in the Peace Corps, it's exacerbated because we have a 5-year term limit. So there's people coming and going all the time, and most of the time they don't even stay for the 5 years. So once they're gone, and we're in the middle of an audit, we can't talk to them about it, or if they don't want to talk to us. That's the importance of a testimonial subpoena. No, it's and I appreciate that the insight on the 5-year term limit, which makes it even more difficult. Mr. Horowitz, and then Mr. Roth.
Yeah, I'll speak to whistleblower matters. Congress, for good reason, gave IGs authority to look at whistleblower retaliation at contractors and grant recipients when management there tried to shut down employees from reporting waste, fraud, and abuse to us. Well, the challenge is, unlike employees in the federal government, which when they're employed they have to speak to us, the same isn't true for current or former employees of contractors or grant recipients. And so we have that authority now to investigate, but I've had cases where the people who were the alleged retaliators either left their jobs, in which case they clearly were unreachable to us because they weren't going to voluntarily speak to us, or even if they were still at the job, it would require management of that organization to tell the employee to speak to us because there's no other way to do that. And so it's very important in the whistleblower space, as well as, frankly, the misconduct space. We see not infrequently department employees conveniently retiring on the eve of being questioned about the misconduct we're investigating.
Seems to be a bad habit. Mr. Roth?
Yeah, and I would add, for example, in the FEMA context, most of the money goes to states as grantees, and then to state and locals as municipalities, and then to private contractors. So just to trace the money and do a basic fraud investigation, never mind the whistleblower retaliation, requires the cooperation of all those folks. Now, the grants give us access to documents, but they don't give us access to people. So being able to go in and interview folks and get people on the record in those kinds of fraud contexts is enormously important.
No, that's great insight. And so we've had some authority kind of like this in the past. It's now disappeared. What's the fix? It's obviously going to require legislative, but what are your ideas on this?
Well, it would require a legislative fix, and to be clear, the Defense Department IG has this authority and has used it very judiciously and appropriately, and as they've noted, just having the authority causes people to want to speak voluntarily, frankly, probably much like this committee, right? You don't probably have to issue many subpoenas to get people to come in and speak with you, but it helps to know that that subpoena power is there. We would need legislation. We worked very closely with the supporters of this in this committee and on the Senate side to put in place controls around it because it was reasonable. There were reasonable concerns to make sure that we would use it in connection with people who actually benefited from government programs. We weren't running around trying to subpoena people who, I'm not sure why we would have the time to do that, but we wouldn't use it for that purpose. So we're prepared to sit down and address any concerns about the use of it, make sure there's effective oversight. We had talked about a 3IG panel to make sure that existed, and that was what was originally in the draft legislation that we worked with the committee on. We're prepared to work and make sure this is used reasonably and appropriately. Frankly, just having the authority I think will cause us to not need to use it.
Well, and your point on Department of Defense is spot on. Them having the authority really precludes a lot of subpoenas. And Mr. Chairman, I think this is something that we ought to explore, that we ought to try to do, because without teeth behind the bark, it's not really going to matter much. And for the record, I would like to assist this committee in that effort. I think that it is something worth doing. And I've run out of time, and I yield back.
We'll do one better. We'll let you take the lead. Why don't you be our lead on finding a way to?
Well, I'm happy and honored to work with the IGs on this issue. I do think it is. We see it in other aspects of government where it's very effective. It's not abused, and I think for our IGs to do even more incredible work, we need to give them the proper tools. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman from Oklahoma. I'll now recognize myself. I'll start by thanking